And so let's jump right into the Tanya, page Vav. We're still on the first page of Perek Bet. If you have your own personal Tanya, or the text on our Facebook page. We talked over the last couple of days about the fact that Am Yisrael, we are called Banim. Banim atem l'Hashem Elokechem. We are the children of Hashem. And just like a child comes from the source, the highest source of the parent, so too, Am Yisrael, we come from the highest source of Hashem. We're on the bottom of the page, 2.5 lines before the bottom, and the Alter Rebbe is going to address a very obvious question. If we say that every single Jew comes from the highest source of Hashem, so then why is there a difference, at least on an obvious level, between different levels of Jews? Some of us are an obvious higher spiritual level, and some of us are on an obvious lower spiritual level. Where does that come from? Aren't all of our neshamas, don't they all come from the same source? Let's see the question inside in your text. Page Vav, corresponding just opposite page 10. V'af sheyesh revavot. V'af sheyesh revavot minei chilukei madregot b'neshamot. And even though there are tens of thousands of different levels of neshamot, each and every one of these levels of neshamot, of souls, can be divided into many, many more parts of neshamot, as the Alter Rebbe discusses later on in the Tanya. Gavoa al gavoa, higher and higher, le'en ketz, to no end. Come on, for example, Godel ma'alat nishmot ha'avot u'Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. And we just turned to page 12. We turn the page. For example, come on, the greatness of the holiness of the neshamot of our forefathers Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Excuse me, please. And Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, aleim shalom, goes for all of them. Al nishmot dorotenu ele deikvi meshicha, upon the neshamot of our generation, of the heels before Mashiach's coming. Can you imagine? This is the Alter Rebbe talking 250 years ago. How much more so now that our neshamas are much, much lower than those neshamot. Shehem bechinat akvayim mamish. That these neshamot of these generations, quote unquote, are literally like the heels. Legabei hamoach v'harosh. In relative to the mind and the head. Let's pause for a moment, or for a few moments, to learn some interesting points. Even a question of the Alter Rebbe needs to be learned, needs to be contemplated on. And so the Alter Rebbe basically says that our neshamas of these generations are like heels in reference to the neshamas of the earlier generations, which are considered like the mind. In other words, if you look at the Am Yisrael of all generations as a body, so some of us are on the level of the head, and some of us are on the level of the heel, and even the toenails, and anything in between. The truth is that within every generation itself, as we'll see soon, there you have this type of configurative body. Some of us are on the level of the head and the eyes, and some of us are on the lowest level. But also, when we look collectively at all the generations, Moshe Rabbeinu, our forefathers, they are on the level of the head. Us, our generation, we are like the level of the toes, of the it's interesting to mention that there's an amazing story. There's an amazing story about the birth of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe's parents, Rabbi Baruch, didn't have children for many years, and the Baal Shem Tov, it was a special brach of the Baal Shem Tov that brought about that Rabbi Baruch and his wife Rivka should have a child, which was the Alter Rebbe. and it's a very long story. The Baal Shem Tov gave a number of instructions to the Alter Rebbe's father, Rabbi Baruch, about how to treat him on the day that the Alter Rebbe was born, which was, by the way, the same birthday as the Baal Shem Tov himself, on Chai Elul, the 18th day of Elul, 12 days before Rosh Hashanah. The Baal Shem Tov living very far from where Rabbi Baruch lived. He was in Mezhibush. The Baal Shem Tov, all of a sudden after Shacharis, was very in a festive mood, and he said a special Dvar Torah, and the Talmidim, the holy Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, could not understand why all of a sudden today was the Baal Shem Tov in such a special mood. In any case, it was the birth of the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe said, the Baal Shem Tov told the Alter Rebbe's parents not that Alter Rebbe was not meant to see the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov said on the day that the Alter Rebbe was born that today a new neshama came down to the world, a brand new neshama. The concept of Gilgul Neshamot, I call the recycling of Neshamot, is something which is very, very ancient concept. It's brought in the Zohar and in other places, and it's known that the Neshamot, many souls that have already been down here in this world, have quote-unquote been recycled and come back down. All of our Neshamot have once been here. It was a chidush, it was a novelty, that the Alter Rebbe's Neshama was considered a new Neshama, quote-unquote. Not quote-unquote, literally, a new neshama. It's appropriate to mention that the Tzemach Tzedek said about his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, he later became, Rabbi Menachem Mendel became the third Chabad Rebbe. But he said about his grandfather, that if he would have lived in the times of the Achronim, he would have been considered an Achron. If he would have lived in times of the Rishonim, which were approximately 700 to 900 years ago, he would have been a Rishon. If he would have lived in the times of the Geonim, he would have been a Gaon, and if he would have lived in times of the Amoraim, he would have been an Amora, author of the Talmud. If he would have lived in the times of the Mishnah, he would have been a Tana, and if he would have lived in times of the Nevi'im, he would have been a prophet. And so this is what the Tzemach Tzedek, who was a great tzaddik himself, said about the Alter Rebbe. And it's known amongst the Rebbes that when they said a comment about someone, especially about a Rebbe, it wasn't just a nice word, nice terminology, but it was literal fact, the way it is. And so the Alter Rebbe himself was a brand new neshama, and he's talking over here about his generation, but still the concept that his generation was the heel, how much more so our generation? We are much, much less than the great tzaddikim that lived 150, 200, 250 years ago. And so this strengthens the question that why is it, if all of our neshamas come from the same source, come from the essence of HaShem, so why are there some of us that are on the level of a head and the mind, which is the highest level, the most elite level of the individual, and some of us are on the level of the heels and the feet? I want to mention one interesting point. Once again, another note on this question from the Alter Rebbe. That the Rebbe indicates an interesting question that can be asked. We say that our generation is going to merit the coming of Mashiach because we are standing upon the shoulders of giants. The famous question is that why should we merit the coming of Mashiach if the greatest generations, the real tzaddikim 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago and beforehand, they didn't merit the coming of Mashiach, so why should we? The answer is because we are standing on the shoulders of the giants. Their ma'asim tovim, their good deeds, have accumulated so much, and our deeds are very minute in comparison to theirs. But because when a midget stands on the shoulders of a giant, they can stand even taller than the giant himself. And so the Rebbe addresses an interesting question about this. If you say that all of the good deeds build upon each other, and therefore, even though we are midgets in good deeds, we stand higher than them, so then maybe also the not good deeds, also they should accumulate. And therefore, our good deeds are much, our not good deeds are much more than, have also accumulated upon the bad deeds of the previous generations. So maybe we should not narrate chas v'shalom the coming of Mashiach. And the Rebbe responds as follows. The Rebbe says that the nature of good and the nature of evil are totally two different natures. The nature of good is that it's a magnetic force. That good brings more good. And therefore, it builds, one good deed builds on top of the other. But when it comes to bad, to evil, the nature of evil is that it does not have, it cannot be sustained itself. Like the famous line that says that sheker ein lo raglaim. Sheker, to say a lie, does not have any feet. It cannot stand. It's like a table with 2 feet. It cannot stand. It's only because it has a little bit of truth. When it has a little bit of truth, then it can remain. Then it can stay. It can have some kind of sustenance. But in itself does not have any level of sustenance. The same thing is bad, evil. Evil does not have. It cannot remain. It's bad. It has. Think of it as being, as an example, just the coronavirus. HaShem Yirachem. That in itself, if it doesn't have anything to hold on to, it withers away. If I understand correctly, hope I'm. It's when it grabs onto something that it's able to nurture from, then that keeps it going. I'm just using that as an analogy to understand the concept of bad. Tov, good energy, in of itself, it remains. In of itself stays. In of itself is able to be maintained on its own. And so, therefore, when do we say that the midget standing on top of the shoulders of a giant is able to stand higher than the giant, and therefore we should and we will merit the coming of Mashiach? That's only but the good things. But regarding the negativity of the world, that is not something which can be built on. That's not something which accumulates. That's something which withers away soon after the bad deed is done, because there's nothing to keep it. That's the nature of bad. Bad is good. Good is nitzchi. Good is life. Life is eternal. HaShem is good. HaShem is the epitome of good. And therefore HaShem is eternal. So anyone that connects to HaShem and to Kedusha naturally stays. But if someone is not connected to Kedusha, or someone is associated, God forbid, with negativity, then that doesn't have a kiyum. That cannot stand alone. Let's get back to the question. So the question was, how can we say that everyone comes from the same source? But you look down here and you'll be able to notice that everyone is on a different level. Some of us are on the level of a mind. Some of us are on the level of the body. Some of us are on the level of the legs. And you cannot compare between two people. So how the difference? How is that possible? So we're towards the end of the third line on page 12. We're continuing the question. V'chein b'chol dor v'dor, and so too in every generation. Yesh Rashei Alfei Yisrael, there are the heads, the leaders of the generation. Shenishmotehem hem b'chinat rosh u'moach legabei nishmot hahamon ve'amei haaretz, that their souls are on the level of a head and a mind in comparison to the souls of the masses, of the regular people and the simple people. Now we continue the question. V'chein nefashot legabei nefashot. Also within every nefesh, within every soul, in comparison to other souls, we have this concept. Why? Ki kol nefesh, because every soul, klula, is included, is made up of, is a combination, so to speak, of minefesh, ruach, and neshama, from the three levels of nefesh, ruach, and neshama. And the truth is, it goes on, because we can look at the neshama the way it has the 5 levels, and as we'll see in a second. So up until here is the question. That we find different scenarios where there's a difference between one neshama and another neshama. Whether we look at all of history on one long level, and we see that our forefathers and Moshe Rabbeinu are on the highest level, and we are on the lowest level, or we look within every generation itself, that there are some of us on the highest level, some of us in the middle, some of us on the lowest level. And moreover, within every neshama, there are many, many levels. So you can have a neshama, which is made up of the three levels of nefesh, ruach, neshama. You can look at the neshama the way it's made up of 5 levels. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. You can look at each neshama the way it's made up of, divided into the 4 worlds of atzilut, bria, yitzira, and asiya. And you can divide up this in many, many ways. So for example, even if you just take the 5 levels of the neshama, the Alter Rebbe talks about it later in the Tanya, you could talk about, remember the Sfirat Omer? We talked about the chesed within chesed, and the gvura within chesed, the way the sfirot, the luminaries of HaShem, and the midot, the levels of emotion, are intertwined within each other. So too, when it comes to the whole concept of neshamas. Each neshama, you can have it the way the nefesh, or the nefesh of the nefesh, or the ruach of the nefesh, or the neshama. So too, you can divide up each neshama into many, many myriads of levels. And so, when we talk about the neshama from this perspective, then we have basically many, many levels of neshamas. But how does that coincide with what we said earlier about the concept of that all of our neshamas come from the essence of HaShem? So that was a very long question. And the point of the answer is, which Be'ezrat Hashem we're going to expand on tomorrow, but just to give you the point, because I'm sure you're not going to be able to sleep if I don't give you at least the point of the answer. And so, at least in a nutshell, that just like a child, when they're born, even before the development of the child in the womb of the mother, while the semen is still in the mind of the parent, in that little drop you have everything of the child, which is going to be soon developed over the next 9 months. But very often it's hard to, it's impossible actually, to be able to identify every single fiber, every single limb of every child before the 9 months. But it's still there. So in other words, we can either view the child the way it is before he was formed or after he was formed. But obviously, even before the child was developed, you still have the source of the heels, just like you have the source of the mind and the eyes and everything else. But nevertheless, it's not revealed. It takes time until it's developed. So, there are some of us that are here in this world that are similar to the way we are above, like Moshe Rabbeinu is a great example. He was holy, he was a tzaddik, as we're going to expand Be'ezrat Hashem tomorrow and over the next few days, the whole concept of what it means to be a leader. The whole concept, the whole understanding of what it means to be Moshe. The whole phenomenon of being a Rebbe. We're going to talk about starting tomorrow, Be'ezrat Hashem, over the next few days. And hopefully we'll be able to understand much better that on one hand, we're all the same. We all have this precious neshama. On the other hand, the way we come down into this world, there are differences. And I think that's what makes us so beautiful, Am Yisrael, that there are differences between us, and we can still get together. We can still live in harmony. So thank you very much for joining us today. Bezrat Hashem, tomorrow we'll continue this very fascinating, fundamental concept. Please spread the word because this is the source.